So it's day three. I think I'm coming down with a bit of a cold, but today I want to explore the approach of finding startup ideas by looking at statistics. And also, yesterday I said I was going to go more in depth with the ideas I'm really sort of looking at. I didn't. Today I'll do that. Oftentimes, startups or companies in general, when you really get down to it, what they're really changing is, some statistic at some order of magnitude. It's pretty interesting when you really start to dig into specific statistics that interest you and you think about how maybe technology could affect that. So I pulled a few statistics that I thought were pretty interesting and sort of things I was interested in. And then from there, I try and factor up like, okay, how can, my personal experience and the technology I know how to work with, or maybe advances in technology that I could easily adapt to work with, um, make an impact in a way for the better on these statistics. So the first one's pretty interesting, I thought, is that cars are parked roughly 90% of their lifetime. And it seems like a waste for the simple sake of a car is parked and not being used by others just because you're the personal owner. It seems in an idealistic world, you could distribute that other, optimally, it will never be optimally, but optimally presuming that other unused 90% to another 9 people in need of a car to offset the total cars in use. That includes both stationary cars and moving by at most 9x. If you were able to do that at even a 2x factor or a 3x factor, which would be crazy, you would have trickle down effects over time, like the need for additional parking or the need for creating, large structures in cities that are just behemoth spaces just to put cars. You could also reduce those, presuming that, people move over to a shared model of car ownership in which the cars are always or most optimally being utilized versus the current ownership model. Another one I really think is interesting is that there's 800,000 children that die every year from diarrhea, and it's simply because they have no access to clean water. And there's nonprofits that are really doing a great job at focusing on this, but I'm wondering, with advances in the atmospheric to water generation, where you can take humidity out of the air and create basically distilled water from it, if there's an application there that could push this number down quite a bit and move forward towards, a place where there's more sustainable and clean water available for everyone in places it's not available. So going on more with this, it's 2,200 children every day. It's primarily in, sub-Saharan Africa or other parts of the world that are, extremely impoverished or don't have the infrastructure yet to support clean water or water sanitation. 88% of deaths from diarrhea-related disease is primarily caused by unclean water. And then the other interesting factor is a majority of tropical diseases proliferate through unclean drinking water. And water sanitation, statistically, all these statistics, I should say, you should probably really do your research and look into. You can find a lot of them on the WHO and whatnot and assume that they're correct, but at the end of the day, statistics are statistics, and if you can't make a sizable impact in real people's lives, they don't matter, so take that at face value. But anyways, going back to water, it's believed that sanitation has the potential to prevent 9% of the global disease burden, and that's just because of the cascading effect of proliferation of disease through unclean water, including, people primarily getting water from dirty sources where mosquitoes are, diseases spread that way, et cetera, et cetera. And it's estimated that around 800 million people in the world, or close to 10% of the world's population, don't have access to clean water. Another statistic that's along the same lines of, the environmental sustainability line that I think could definitely be improved upon with things that we have now, just with a cultural shift or a social shift, which is no easy means at all, is that livestock currently accounts for about, I think, 14% of all the greenhouse gas emissions. But the thing beyond that 14% is that it's primarily methane, which is a lot more harmful to the atmosphere and particularly global warming. It's interesting if you look at livestock and their use in our lives as primarily a protein provider for human beings. And you look at the alternatives, right? So something that I find really interesting is that crickets specifically have the potential to provide, for the same amount of protein that comes from an entire cow, you can get the same amount from many crickets using about 1/12 of the feed required to grow and raise the cow. And also about, if you scale this out, you can reduce the land usage of livestock as you start to really shift over to a model of crickets for protein supply of about 100x. So like think about the acreage used by livestock today and reduce that by 2 orders of magnitude. That would be pretty incredible. But again, this is something that would come down to, how do you change the public's perception of food, of bugs? How do you shift like our already ingrained cultural idealism of meat consumption to bug consumption? It's very hard to shift people at a large scale to do something completely different unless it's absolutely necessary. And until it's absolutely necessary, it's going to take some very creative means, I think, to actually get that process going. You can keep going with these statistics. I mean, I'm rattling on about them, but really when you start to dig into some space that you're interested in, you'll find some shocking stuff, and make sure, to really do your research. So yesterday I was sort of going on about like how to go about looking at the world in a way that you see it for what it really is, and you get rid of all your like cultural assumptions and whatnot that you've sort of been pre-programmed to look at the world through. And that's another great way, like I said, to find a startup idea. And conversely, well, actually, I wouldn't even say conversely, because these two go hand in hand. The statistical reduction or improvement, depending on which way is for the better, and whatever your startup idea might be, or in my case, whatever my startup idea might be, that I'll end up working on through this challenge, should hit or impact one of these, seemingly important statistics in a way that leverages something that isn't already being leveraged for the better, for profit, for nonprofit, whatever it may be. So today I basically boiled down a few things I was interested in looking more into. One of them is books, and it's interesting to me why people still primarily use libraries and physical hard copy books. Not just using them in libraries, but a lot of book sales are still physical hard copy. And it seems suboptimal versus, digital books. And I understand the whole thing about, wanting to be able to underline books, to tangibly touch them, to feel them. But I'm really curious after looking why there isn't a service that is basically a Spotify for books. Something to look into, maybe. Another one that is sort of, I would say, a pipe dream, just because I don't have the technical experience personally to pursue it, but that's not to say that it's impossible to pursue something when you don't have experience in a certain space. A lot of startups actually have founders that have no idea what they're doing in a space, and they end up creating really impactful companies just because they have that sort of virgin mindset when coming at that problem or that technical space, and they have other outside experiences they can apply. But this is clean water generation through atmospheric means, so where you take humidity in the air, generate distilled water, use it to supply the population that doesn't have clean water, an alternative way of getting clean water, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where a lot of places humidity is very high. It seems to make sense. Economically, though, it would probably be a nonprofit venture. I don't think there's any way for profit that you could go about doing it, at least initially, but who knows? And this is one of those things where for profit, that's not even the point, right? It's for, helping people who are in desperate need and going from there. Another space that sort of caught my attention is the growth in the general space of the on-demand economy. So when we look at some of the startups that are really starting to thrive in the last, 4 to 6 years, and sort of where people in the first world are moving towards, and it's instant availability of whatever service or resource it might be that you want. So we see this with like Amazon Prime, Prime Now, and Amazon same-day deliveries. We see this with Uber, Lyft. They provided transportation when you don't have a vehicle or you need a ride within a few minutes after your request. We see this with Lime scooters, Lime bikes. You need last mile transport. You need ultralight transport. It's there, available for you, ideally within a few blocks within a city that has support for it. And I'm sure there's quite a few other less massive cases of this. But the rate at which the on-demand economy is growing and its applicability to almost every industry, I think, is interesting. Shared cars, like we tested in the first vlog, was one of the original ideas I really had an interest in. And that's not because there's a huge obvious opening, because there's not. There's services that are already trying to get the shared car model up and going. There's Car2Go and Reach Now. I just think there's a better way to do it where you subsidize out the cars being used and made available for sharing, where the cars are owned by private fleet owners, private individuals, and they take a cut of the profit each time their car is used and it's out in the wild being used by people. It seems like the only real way you could make something like that work, given the current infrastructure that we're at now and transitioning into a more optimized shared model for the world, because otherwise what are car owners going to do with all their own cars? Like, it wouldn't make sense economically for people to use shared cars when they already have a real car, but conversely it doesn't make sense owning a car when any car in any city that you go to and visit would be available for you to hop into and use. And also the cost of car ownership is actually quite high, all things included. It's, I think, on average about $700 to $800 a month in the US. But I did the cost modeling on this. For a person who travels 5 days a week for work, let's say 20 miles round trip, which I think is the national average to get to and from work, and then you factor in maybe 20 to 30 miles driving on the weekends for entertainment purposes or getting around or visiting family or relatives or whoever, the costs in a way that break down where it's profitable for a private fleet owner to make their car shared and also economically conscientious for the drivers ends up being around $450 to $500 a month for someone who ends up just using a shared car. This is hard to justify and make grow very quickly, I think, because we look at the problem which cars are already addressing, which is, transport instantaneously when you own your car, are already being addressed through owning the cars. Like, to make them shared doesn't change anything on the consumer end other than maybe a little bit of cost optimization. So that's something I'm trying to see. Is there something I'm missing there? Is there something I'm not seeing? And that's sort of what I've been dabbling around with more deeply than any of the other ideas. And the last idea I've also been seriously interested in is the shared scooter services. So Bird, Lime. What they're doing is extremely interesting to me. It makes a lot of sense, right? So they already have massive, scale, massive growth, but being that there's, I think, only 12 major competitors in the space that are really known right now, and I'm sure there's going to be at least a few dozen more. And this market is gigantic, not just in the US, but over the entire world. And it seems that the pie is so large that any company that's really getting into the space and has a sizable market share of any given country, if you have a few cities in any country or many cities across a given continent, like, you can do a lot with that. There's a lot of opportunity in this space, and this space also has a lot of rapid growth, I think, for anywhere these services are launched that doesn't yet have them. And that's something that's super interesting to me and something I'm really wanting to keep exploring. But the problem is, I don't think that simply copying a model for the sake of copying a model and beating others to market is enough of an interest to me. It seems, again, just like what I've done in the past, cash grabs. And I'm not sure how you differentiate the current scooter model in a way that makes a 10x value over what it currently is, because the value that it's providing is very high. And what I think it did over the prior shared transport, which I think primarily in the US was bikes, so we had Lime Bike, we had a lot of bike services that were shared, is that it provided a more convenient, more compact, and more easily rideable means that's actually even fun too, over bikes. And in a lot of ways, I don't know if that's an order of magnitude better, but it was so much better that most people will always choose scooters over bikes, it seems. So thanks for watching. The next few days, I'm really focusing on starting to zero in on some of these ideas that are really going to be fun to test and see if there's, some real potential in them. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and like I said, every day I'll be posting a new video with updates, hopefully something you can learn from, something that gets you thinking, and thanks.